The RFNG is supported in part by funding from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. Dzawada'enuxw First Nation, Lake Babine Nation, Lil'wat Nation, Listuguj Mi'gmaq Government, Papatha Council, and the Upper Nicola Syilx Nation. These are the First Nation community partners across Canada, who are all collaborating with RFNG to further study and implement our inherent right to self-government. Hello, and welcome to Inherent Rights Informed Voices, a podcast brought to you by the Center for First Nations Governance and the Rebuilding First Nations Governance project. Today we're speaking with our community partners to learn more about their experiences pursuing self-governance. I'm Dr. Mason Ducharme, and I will be your host today. My time as a National Community Research Director at RFNG and Executive Director at the CFNG has given me the chance to collaborate with First Nations across the country. Without community partners, our work wouldn't be possible. Last episode, we discussed the importance of citizen engagement, and today we have the opportunity to learn about the personal experience of those citizens, particularly those who act as community change champions. They will speak on a panel about their successes, challenges, and opinions on achieving self-governance within their nation while giving insight to others who are interested in the process. Colette Sunday is the band administrator at our partner First Nation, Upper Nicola Syilx Nation. She is an award-winning band manager, and she is not afraid to hold our feet to the fire on getting this important work done in a timely manner. Ernest Armann works for Statlium Chiefs Council as a consultant with organization and nation building, while also an RFNG partner on our steering committee. Ernest is also a recovering band manager and a friend and mentor of mine. Hey everyone, it's really great to get the opportunity to learn from you all today. Thanks for making the time for us. It's going to be a real honor to learn from the nation perspective. So the first question is, what motivated you to participate in the Rebuilding First Nations Governance project?
It was actually, I learned about the Rebuilding First Nation Governance project when I was attending one of the First Nation Public Service Secretariat conferences in Vancouver. And lo and behold, my old buddy there, Ernest, was actually doing a presentation there along with James Froh from IPAC and a member of I think it was the chief from Lil'wat Nation, and they were sharing their experience that they had been underway with Rebuilding First Nation Governance. And so I could see it was on the agenda, and one of our council members was just at, I think it was the leadership gathering, the BC leadership gathering happening at the same time. And I said, hey, come on over. I want you to listen to this. And so as we listened to the presentation, it was it was very cool, in which like everything that they were talking about is like, hey, check, we're doing that. Hey, that's something we want to do. Oh, this is so cool. We got to get to know how we can get involved. So after they were done their presentation, went up and chatted with Ernest and James and said, hey, this is something Upper Nicola would really want to learn about, because we've been talking about how do we take conscious steps to move away from the Indian Act, and that's what you guys are doing. So we want to learn more from you. And so Ernest was saying, well, that's what it's all about. That's why we're here, to share the story. We want to share with other First Nations that have similar visions. So that's how I first heard about the Rebuilding First Nation Governance project.
That's amazing. I forgot about that. And but to me, I think really why I thought this was important because it's something that we all need to do. All of our nations in BC need to do this work. And I think and I really bought into the whole philosophy that we're here to share our learning as well. And I think because it's kind of a new area, I'm going to say it's something that's more organized, I think, than the way maybe we've been approaching self determination in the past. But for me, it's always been about how do we get out of the Indian Act because I've seen what it does to us when you live in the community on reserve, the generational impacts that it causes, and it's deteriorating our peoples. And for me, being a past band manager and being involved in managing the poverty system, there had to be a different way. And I think I got involved in this project when I learned about it when I worked for Lil'wat, and they had a desire to make a change in circumstances, and we both happened to know Satzan, and I was a student of his back in the '90s, and it was interesting to see how they evolved the Center for First Nations Governance and what they were doing. And so I think it made it real easy for us to participate because there was a willingness in the community to make a difference, and leadership wanted to make a difference. And I had some experience around facilitation, community development, governance development, organization development. And I think that really value added to that whole initiative because we started to think about how we're going to implement. And when you do that parallel streams of work, as you do the engagement, create awareness, understanding, and building consensus amongst your members, we're also looking at how do we improve our organization to be able to take our responsibilities forward and implement self-determination under our inherent rights. So that to me, I thought was really exciting. I've always been a student and learning on this subject for probably about 3 decades now, and it's good to see this initiative out there.
Yeah, I know one of the some of the aha moments for us as we've been participating in the research and hosting a lot of focus groups over the years, we always came down to the same two solutions about what we could do about it right now. And that was we need to revitalize our language and we need to get back onto the land. So if we were to implement those two things, things are going to start to turn around for us. So we know that that people do not have a connection that we would like them to have, or that it would just be amazing if they had that connection to the land. So if we could just be out on the land, and I've just been able to witness that in different times over the last few years, and thinking about some of our staff is like, oh, this is so much challenges to get everybody out here, and we're having this huckleberry picking camp, and they actually had about 60 people that were out there. And I said, can you imagine? I said, yeah, all this work is hard, but but can you imagine some of the children that are here? They've lost their grandparents. But can you imagine how happy those grandparents would be to see their young ones carrying on these traditions or learning about them, being connected, learning about healthy foods from our Tumakula. So it's like, yes, your work is worth all of that extra energy. Just keep going, because it's going to help everybody. By them being out on the land, it's going to help them with their mental wellness. It's going to help them start to learn about who people are in the community, who they can ask for help from. So it's wonderful to see all of these opportunities when people get out there and then they just have that drive to like, I want to go back there. When are we going again? Give me a call. So it's like, it's great. And then thinking about one of the big indicators that we know that have we've had to address is looking at the numbers of fluent or semi-fluent speakers. We had, like back in 2022, we only had 12 to 15 people. Well, how many people have passed on since then? We're less than 10 people that have the fluent in Syilxian language here. So what are we going to do about it? So we have to start putting efforts together. So we've actually just started in Syilxian Language House. So we have two instructors that are helping 6 language apprentices learn the language. So we're not saying 45 minutes a day. No, we're saying 8 hours a day, 32 hours a week. Let's have people come together and learn. So that they're not only going to learn in the classroom, but they're going to be out on the land. So to start to say, like, okay, you're going to have an opportunity for 2 years to focus on language. That's your job. Learn, help yourself learn the language. So we'll be bringing in fluent speakers to help them. And the goal is like every 2 years, we will have another cohort open up. So we're going to have 6, and then we'll have another 6 and continue that. We know we have a long way to go, but it's been a big community dream, and we're starting to put action into place now.
We've been too reliant, become too dependent on handouts, and all those kind of things. It is about how to regain our identity and our pride, and to be able to take care of ourselves. And I think that's a big push. That's part of this work, and if we ignore it, we're not going to make a change. And so when we look at doing our overall strategy to move forward, it's looking at all these factors and understanding them, and how are we going to manage them? How are we going to address them? You talked about doing gap analysis and all these kind of things. In the health area, there's been so much discussion around this I've been involved with. It's time to actually get into action and to actually make a difference. We can't do any more studies. We can't do any more things like that. It's about doing the work to make a difference now. And I think that's the priority. It should be a priority. And in our plan, we make it a priority. Just having the opportunity to do that and have it focused in one direction really helps. The more people that get involved, the better. And I think that's the advantage of this project. It is about educating more people to actually do that. That's pretty exciting. Yeah, we have the same kind of process here. It's different strengths in different parts of the territory. But one of the things I think is we need to have one St'át'imc language authority to start developing all the materials we need for early childhood learning. Doing things on the Mi'gmaq. But there has been a lot of investment into maintaining the language. There is those people that have gone through the training now; they're becoming the experts. So it's really good to see that. There's a number of our staff here at the Tribal Council who are in language training, and they're trying to help teach us. So it's working and starting to come back. But some communities, like you say, they maybe have 1 or 2 fluent speakers left, and that's a big issue. So we're becoming extinct. And to me, that's dangerous, because when you think about the definition of what a nation is, you got to have your own language. You have to have your own land base. And, and I think if you don't have your language, then is that we don't become a people anymore? I don't know. But it's part of that nationhood piece as well. And, when we think about our language, some of my mentors, they've always been big on language. Then the teachings that they pass on, it's our culture. And I've heard some of the key definitions out there about some of these key things that we do. But language is culture, culture is life. Those kind of slogans are hand in hand what you just shared. And I think it's good for us to get out in the land at least 2 weeks a year at a minimum. But for us, living off the land is still a big piece for a lot of folks. Fishing's still a big deal here in St'át'imc, in all areas. There's a lot of reliance on wild game for meat sources yet, and we have that responsibility to manage those resources, and it's become a lot more difficult, and so the impacts of climate change and all these fun things. But we've always been in a world of change, and so being connected is critical, and being grounded comes along with that. That learning, participation, doing makes a big difference.
I like this. I'm trying my best not to interrupt, because I'm like, I never get to see these two talk, and it's so fascinating. I'm like, I'm a terrible host, though. I'm not chatting at all. And it's got me thinking a lot about some of our language, because in my community, a lot of elders reach out to me and say, Mason, we need the young people to be involved. And I think about even the Lil'wat Nation strategic plan, and we say Uklamuk Temuk, and that means the people and the land are one. And I hear from the elders that we get our laws from our language, and the language comes from the land. So I'm just thinking about all these cool ideas that are emerging that are being reinforced by this discussion. And I think something that I really want to really celebrate for both of you guys is you guys might not see this, but in the academic world, we would call you both change champions, community change champions, because you guys are the ones that initiated this important work that's happening in your community. Of course, you can make an argument that it's been going on for a long time, but you guys have sustained it for at least the last decade or so, right? And I think one thing that needs to be celebrated with you two is it's because of your leadership that this nation rebuilding work has gone past just your community. Because that's what the Indian Act does is, okay, this is the Lil'wat Nation now, but we're not really a nation. We're a community. And our greater nation is the Dzawada'enuxw Nation. And the same could be said with Upper Nicola. You guys have brought it up to the next level because of your community change championship. You've brought it up to saying, let's get this going at the national level. So, Ernest, you brought it to the Dzawada'enuxw Chiefs Council where you invited the center in. Colette, you brought it up to Shwakam Tribal Council where we've had these discussions. So you guys are trailblazers. And I just want to take a moment to kind of celebrate that. That's a huge win, and that's important to kind of keep this work going. And another thing that keeps this going too is that this is multi-generational work, right? We think about this, and Satsan says, we're the children being born today are the 8th children being born under the Indian Act. And it gets us thinking, well, we're also entering our 150th year under the Indian Act this year. And we notice not a lot has changed. And it's got us thinking that it's going to take many generations for us to exit this Indian Act. I call it, some of our communities are experiencing what I coin Indian Act paralysis. We're scared of moving out of the Indian Act. We keep going back to it. We'll make one decision, and then somehow we bring back chief and council into the mix. And we're like, why? You guys are empowered to do this work as a community, right? So I think that's a key thing that you both have mentioned. Colette, you mentioned the grandmothers group. That's great. Ernest, you mentioned you like working with young people. That's awesome. But what can our communities do to make it so our elders are working with our youth so that this work continues? I've only seen 2 people in my life that have really stepped up with that. And that's Satsan, and that's Raymond Pierre, the great Raymond Pierre. Both of them identified my strengths and said, I want to pass down my knowledge so you could carry this work on when I'm gone. And I think that's a powerful statement. And when you think about the inherent right to self-government, that aligns with how we empowered our people. Soon as somebody was born, we knew what their role was going to be. We recognized somebody's strength. They had a role in the community. And I think that's something we really have to hit home with people, is this is intergenerational work. And we need to start identifying our young people to carry this on, right? I think about my oldest daughter, Riel, and I gave her a traditional name, Papethla, because of the great work of the Papethla Council in our territory, where they're trying to move out of the Indian Act. And I say, okay, I might not be the one that gets us out of the Indian Act, but maybe that's my eldest daughter that gets us out of there. I think that's a really cool thing. It's that planning you keep going back on to, Ernest. When we think about strategic plans from, a European context, they think 5 years. But if we think back to how we planned traditionally, it was far longer than 5 years. It'd be 50 years, 100 years. It wouldn't even really be in years, it'd probably be generations. I'm planning for my grandchildren, my great grandchildren, the 7 generations, right? And I just want to close off with one question because I think this will really help our audience. Is what would you say to nations who are considering making the move out of the Indian Act but are just unsure? Because we have a lot of communities that seem to be content with the Indian Act, or at least scared of moving out of it. What would you leave them with to kind of get them motivated and excited like you guys are?
I think that if First Nations that are not uncertain if they want to move out of the Indian Act, it should be a pretty easy decision for them if they were to start to hear from other nations that have made that conscious decision, and to say why did you decide to move away from the Indian Act? And then we can start to share, First Nations can start to share, or communities can start to share their story, and then they're going to see so many similarities. Hey, that's us. We went through that. We understand what you're talking about. And I think it's going to be just that easy. It has to be nation to nation, community to community, to pass on that message, to pass on those teachings, and they're going to find similarities, similar to what I opened up with when we heard Ernest and the chief at that time, and James giving that presentation. We're like, hey, that's us. That's us. We have been talking about all of these things. So it's like trying to, and then wanting to make that connection, and then talking to other communities that are a part of rebuilding First Nation governance, and seeing that whether you're here in British Columbia or across Turtle Island here, we all have a lot of the same similarities, and we can learn from one another. By us networking, we can build each other up, because we're all the same in that aspect, and we can all help each other out.
I was just thinking about, I've had the privilege, I think, of being involved on the ground with a lot of things, and to want to make that change. And, I think it's something that you can't make a horse drink water if you bring him to it. But I think if you start doing the work about making a change for basic livelihood, that is moving in the right direction. I think it's really about, you have to understand what the systems have done to us. I think you got to come from a place of understanding to be able to make a difference, to move forward, to make a decision, to move forward. I think the other part too that I think is really a big obstacle, or one of the barriers to making change, is developing trust. And that could be in all kinds of fashions. But I think it's about being consistent in what you do. It's about sharing what you know, and you have to create safety. And I think that would be a big help. But I think you're kind of right in your observation that a lot of folks don't want to make change, just because we've been conditioned to think that way. And for me, I get my inspiration by just knowing that when I look at the Declaration, and a lot of our people look at our Declaration, that gives them enough incentive to make a difference. It's about knowing who you are and where you come from. And really, it's about coming to terms with what you think is right and what's not right. And right now, the way the system is, it's not right. It doesn't help us. It doesn't strengthen us. It doesn't give us our roles and responsibilities. We have to take it. We have to earn it. We have to understand it. And we have to be involved. I think nation-led, community-driven is a key point. And it's something that I think it's a direct that we use in the health work. When I look at nationhood, it's the same thing. And we need to create that identity, stick with that. And to make it different, we have to understand where we're coming from and what we're trying to address. So I think it's really just understanding that piece, and to really want to make a difference, and to start a safe conversation somehow. And there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of teachings out there. And I think it's about creating a pathway for you to do that engagement, to build a consensus, to make a difference. And I don't know if that answers the question right, but I think to get beyond our fears, we're going to realize the freedom, and I think that's it. It's just wanting to make a difference. And I think that's the driver for me right from day one.
I really like that. So I'm going to kind of close this off by a reflection, and kind of how I'm interpreting this is both from the CFNG and RFNG side of things. It sounds like one of the reasons communities might not want to move out of this Indian Act is because they don't understand the full impact of the Indian Act. And from the CFNG point of view, that's one of the reasons why we exist. We go through the workshop. The first thing is, okay, here's our 5 pillars of effective governance. What did it look like for your community before contact? Okay, good to know. You've effectively developed, what your inherent right to self-government looked like. And then a second part is, okay, in 1876, the Indian Act was introduced, and here's what's happened in the past 150 years. How has this Indian Act impacted your inherent right to self-government? And then you go through the process where they get to look at the 5 pillars of effective governance and see how it has impacted it. And then you go through the case law, you go through consultation and accommodation as a way to really lift up our people and say, we have Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution, and it's a full box of rights thanks to all this Indigenous case law from the past 30 years. What are you going to do with this? And then you close off with a strategy, the inherent right strategy, and you get the community to prioritize what are the strategies, how are we going to move forward, how are we going to make sure this work doesn't stop as soon as, Satsen leaves the community, right? So it's essentially a change. It's a change model, organizational change model, to get a community to say, I'm so damn sick of this Indian Act and I want to move out of it. And it inspires hope, as we hear from elders time and time again. And then thinking back to what Colette said, the importance of hearing a community's story to inspire others. We're in our final year of the Rebuilding First Nations Governance Project, and that's one of our key deliverables we're working on, is documenting the inherent right to self-government journey of our community partners. And that's been a criticism we hear time and time again about the inherent right to self-government is, well, who's doing it and how far did they get, or what did they do to get there? And essentially that's what we want to show is here are 5 of our community partners, and here's what they've been doing, and here's what you could be doing too. So it's a really fascinating thing, and that's kind of how these 2 organizations, tie up together. And you've given me a lot to think about. I am looking at the time though, and I would like to thank you guys for your time today. And I'm really hopeful this is maybe the first of many opportunities where we can nerd out together. We'll call ourselves the band management experience.
Oh man! All right, sounds good.
Thanks, guys.
All right, take care.
Our second guest is Dwayne Nashkawa, who is a Governance Development Director at Muknagan and also serves as an RFNG Steering Committee member. Hey Dwayne, thanks for joining me today. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing very well. I'm very pleased to be here today.
What motivated you to participate in the Rebuilding First Nations Governance Project?
My interest in this project and governance generally goes back a long way. My background is in working with exclusively with First Nations. I started as in a political advocacy organization called the Lil'wat Nation, which represents 40 or so Anishinaabe communities around the Great Lakes. And later on, I moved to Nipissing First Nation and became the CEO. And that was where my interest in sort of the intersection between, research and academia and what's happening on the ground in the nations really sort of took hold. And I had sort of experienced, like many other nations, we had experienced some pretty bad experiences with researchers wanting to come into the communities I was working with, and I wanted to sort of mine a lot of information and traditional knowledge, and then sort of take off with it. And of course, that was in the earlier days in the 90s and early 2000s, and there's been a lot of reform that happened subsequently. But my interest when I started to hear about the Rebuilding First Nations Governance Project was just, how can, as a CEO, where you're working on various governance initiatives while you're doing all the day-to-day administrative functions of running a mid-sized community, there's not a lot of time to do that kind of deeper thinking and research and policy analysis and that sort of thing. And, I thought there could be a lot of value in just having some space and being around other people who were thinking about this stuff from across the country. And when the opportunity came along, I sort of jumped at it, just for all of those reasons. And I'm really glad I did, because it's been a really wonderful experience.
Thanks for sharing that, Dwayne. I could definitely understand where you're coming from, because I used to be a band manager too, and you have so much stuff on your plate all the time, and sometimes research is the lowest priority. But it sounds like one of the things that you appreciate about this research project is the opportunity to speak with other communities that are doing this important work as well.
Oh yeah, exactly right. And I mean, every nation is different and has unique circumstances and different opportunities and challenges. But there's so much of our experience that is the same, and where projects like this afford the opportunity to sort of do a little bit of comparison, or relating to other nations' circumstances, and just the generation of new ideas, and the sparks that can fly when you have a conversation, with somebody who might live thousands of miles away, but is experiencing many of the same things and challenges you're experiencing, is really valuable. And then to capture that and to generate research out of it, for a policy nerd like me, can be pretty exciting.
When we're thinking about our work at RFNG, we used to say we're going to create a roadmap so communities will know, what are the paths they can take to get to, implementing their inherent right to self-government. And we started to say, well, roadmap sounds a bit prescriptive, like there's just one way. We said, well, what if there was like a road trip approach where, everyone takes a different way to get there, but at the end it's always the same goal, right? To transition out of the Indian Act into exercising our inherent right to self-government. And it sounds like the organization you're referencing were taking lots of stops along the way to kind of get there, right? I was blown away by hearing everything you're doing, especially the Constitution. If we're going to say we're nerds about something, I must say I've recently started thinking that constitutions are really a beautiful document, right? And I think about the first episode of this podcast where Dr. Francis Abel said, if you don't create your own constitution, the Indian Act is your constitution. And I was like, whoa, that's a powerful statement, and that really wants me to go out and create my own constitution for my own community.
Well, I have a story that I've shared many times, and I never stop sharing it, because I think for me it was a pretty special experience, and I'll share it now briefly. In 2013 the Anishinaabe Edibindagzajig, or those who belong at Nipissing, passed the Chinooks or the Constitution. And, that was for me, I think a lot of people were wondering, oh, what does this really mean? What's, like many of us, really thought, okay, well, this means, like this shift away from the Indian Act and toward, really an articulation of who the Bising Anishinaabe are and how we govern ourselves, but then I think people were just thinking, well, I don't really know what's going to change here. But so about a week or two later, so one of the things that the Nipissing Constitution or Chinooks articulated was that Anishinaabemowin, or the Anishinaabe language, Ojibwe language, was the first language of Nipissing First Nation. And about a week later, a young man came in. He's a friend of mine now. Didn't know him that well at the time. Came into the administration office, walked up to the receptionist, and started speaking in the language about services he was looking for. And this was a second generation, second language learner who's effectively become fluent now. And he's a language teacher in the high school at Nipissing now. But he came in and wanted services in his first language. And he was making a really important point. And I could overhear this. I was in my office just down the hall because the receptionist wasn't fluent, didn't know the language, couldn't really help him. But it wasn't so much about the service specifically. He was making a point. We passed this Chinook Nagawin. We said we were going to do this way. And this is my expectation, And for me, that was when it sort of all started to hit home. Like, this is really important. Like, this has shifted this man's thinking, and he is trying to reinforce our thinking, and he's trying to encourage us to keep it going. Like, don't leave it on the shelf now. We're living this thing. And I'm really grateful to that man. He was a very young man at the time, but he's a father now, and his children are fluent. Like, he's raised them in the language. And, that's the power of something like a constitution, the effort to change came from this person, and I've never stopped telling that story since that day. It had such a powerful impact on me, it's those little acts of sovereignty, that emerge from doing this stuff this way, and I'm really grateful to have been witness to that and worked in some small part on that. So
that's a really beautiful and powerful story, Dwayne. I could see why you share it all the time, and I'm glad that him and his kids are, fluent speakers too, because that's important. And, I think that comes with a lot of things when we're the band manager is, we'll spend so much time creating a document, and then we forget about the importance on actually the symbolism on it, or what it actually means to implement it fully, right? And that's really resonated with me, so I'm going to start thinking about that too. Like, if we do create our constitution, what's going to change, right? I think about my supervisor, my PhD supervisor. He'd always say, so what? So what? You wrote something about this. Why is it important? What are you going to do about it, right? And I think that's really good to know. I think that's all of the questions I had prepared, Dwayne. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we close this interview?
I just want to, sort of say, I'm so grateful to the Rebuilding First Nations Governance project and the CFNG, and because, outside of all the good work, I've made tremendous friendships with Satsan and Francis and Catherine MacQuarrie, and and many others. And like those for me are going to endure beyond, a shirk grant. And like those relationships, like in that network, like those are all maybe byproducts of all of this, but to me, like they are, for me, and I think, for our nation, some of those kind of connections are so vitally important. That's what carries the work forward once the grant ends. Is like those relationships and those friendships, and and I'm really grateful to that, and to get to know you a little bit better today, and I just I wish you well, and everybody else, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Mia.
Thanks, Dwayne. That's really beautiful. It is these friendships and these relationships that are going to continue well beyond the Shirk grant, and I don't think that's something that Shirk measures as an output of success of a project, but I think for us, that's what really keeps us going, I think that any time that RFNG holds their conferences that they hold every 2 years or so, it's really beautiful to see our communities connect and learn about what each other are doing, and share some best or wise practices. Thank you so much, Dwayne, and like you said, this will be the first of many times for us to chat and get to know each other better, and you've left a really positive impression on me, Dwayne. I could see why you're so heavily involved in our project and why we love having you on our podcast, so thanks for always answering our call.
I appreciate that very much, and all the best. And I look forward, like I said, I look forward to continuing the conversation. So in our language, we say, we don't say goodbye or anything. We say, Bamapi minwa kawab min, I'll be seeing you again.
My language, we just say hope math, and that's see you later. Thank you to Colette Sunday, Ernest, Armann, and Dwayne Nashkawa for sharing their informed voices with us today. We hope you join us next time on Inherent Rights, Informed Voices, Reclaiming Our Rights and Ourselves. Next episode, we're delving into the duty to consult and accommodate First Nations communities across Canada with Serena Smith. Our season finale is fast approaching. If you want to ask a question and have it answered on air with our host Catherine MacQuarrie, make sure to email iriv.rfng@gmail.com. That's iriv.rfng@gmail.com, so your voice is heard.